Welcome to Ethical Economics, a campaigning podcast series that puts people, fairness, and freedom at the heart of economic life. My guest today is Professor Henry Mintzberg, Cleghorn Chair of Management Studies at McGill University in Canada. Henry is the author of over 20 books focusing on management, organisation, strategy, healthcare, and rebalancing society, the primary focus of this conversation. Professor Mintzberg has pioneered a more practical and profitable approach to manager development as co-founder of the International Masters Programme for Managers and also the International Masters for Health Leadership. He champions managers, not MBAs. He's received an extraordinary number of awards, accolades and citations in his 60-year career, including the Order of Canada and 21 honorary degrees from universities around the world. And he was described by Tom Peters as perhaps the world's premier management thinker. We begin this conversation with a brief overview of Henry's work in an attempt to frame it in the context of ethical economics. So, Henry, one of the things I was looking at was the way in which we can conceptualize rebalancing society and drawing in other ideas from your work. Especially, I'm thinking managing and simply managing, just in terms of the way in which leaders are and are not educated. And also just the linking back to some of your strategy work and the way in which planning has dominated over strategic insight and vision and drawing out the insights of the people who are on the ground. One concept you talked about of eating the scrambled eggs in one video I watched.
That's the first story in the bedtime book.
And then I was also wondering how you'd feel if we're using, I know in the book managers not MBAs, we've got a view of people in charge, the MBAs, and then when I look at those things of how you describe them and what we see, it could easily be managers not politicians, certainly in the UK, in terms of people who are detached from the constituents, who see superficial answers or think they can get a grasp of something in half a day, or read the case notes and then pronounce some conclusion and ignore the vision and the experience of people that have been there for 30 or 40 years. And then I also, if you're willing, if we've got time, of course, is managing the myths of healthcare. I thought that whilst it's officially about healthcare, I thought that was some wonderful practical examples in that of how to have a more caring business that better balances its own interests with those of their clients, patients, constituents, and stakeholders. So hopefully that would be a great chat. What do you think of that?
Well, it's a summary of everything I've ever done.
Yes.
So I'm not sure how to respond. When you say managers, not politicians, it kind of intrigues me. Certainly not the managers that I'm critical of. And I also, by that, I mean, a lot of management, I think, has gone off the rails. It's too detached. It sometimes goes under the guise of leadership, but even under the guise of management, it's sometimes so numbers oriented and so technocratic and so removed that that I'm not sure who, not politicians. Nelson Mandela, not politicians. And what does it mean to be grounded? In management, to be grounded is to shop in your own stores and walk, and experience your own factories and make hamburgers at McDonald's and all that kind of thing, so you know what's going on. Politicians, I think, have a natural, good politicians, of whom there are fewer and fewer, have a natural propensity, I think, to connect with people on the ground. Somebody just passed away in Canada named Ed Broadbent. He was head of the New Democratic Party, which is sort of our Labour Party, but it's a party that will never get elected federally, or at least has never been elected federally, but occasionally, as now, kind of forms an implicit coalition with the Liberals, who don't have quite enough seats to stay in power. And so the NDP is the kind of left-wing government that sometimes gets elected provincially. And Broadbent was kind of almost revered when he just died, because he was such a lovely guy. and such a caring guy, sort of a Nelson Mandela kind of guy, I guess. He didn't go through this crises. And, if you go through the range of conservative or even Labour prime ministers in the UK, what a lot. I mean, what's his name? Blair was amazing at the beginning and then just absolutely blew it, completely blew it, lost it. And and so who, not politicians, maybe should be the question. I'm not sure that covers everything you talked about, but uh, you
No, I
know,
think it's some great opening remarks. I'm just wondering if you'd like to just um, give us a brief introduction how you got into and how you've been drawn to so many areas of management, leadership, healthcare theory, um, and just give us a quick overview for people who may not be entirely familiar with all your work, just where you started and the arc of your career. Would that be possible?
yeah, I mean, it looks like a lot, but for most of the time, it was management. It was either the nature of managerial work, or it was the creation of strategies, or it was management education, management development. But it was all management until maybe, I don't know, 10, 15 years ago. Even healthcare, the book is called Managing the Myths of Healthcare. So this is a management book. It's just a management book about healthcare. Um, the real change was Rebalancing Society, where I was watching and continued to watch the world self-destructing, and nobody seems to get it as to what's going on. In fact, what I do worry about is America self-destructing at a accelerating rate. And Biden will not be able to resolve that. He's a prisoner of that sort of separation. And so what I do is reframe. Everything I've done can be described as reframing. I reframed how we viewed managerial work. I reframed how we viewed strategy. I reframed how we develop managers. And we need to reframe our politics. So I look and starting in the United States in a way, and what I do, sorry to go on at length, but I think it's important, is America's divided between the comfortable and the angry. Okay, and the comfortable support Biden and the angry support Trump. The comfortable support conservative movements, but not necessarily Trump. And the angry support Trump. The comfortable divided into those who care and those who don't. Those who don't simply are happy with their entitlements, and those who care worry about it. The angry, this is more important, and I've never seen this discussed, but surely somebody must have thought about it. The angry are divided into the just plain angry. They're just angry. It might be personal, it might be relations with their parents, it could be anything, but they're just plain angry. Some of them very well off. I know a woman who's very well off, who's totally Trump, and and the beleaguered. And the beleaguered are key because the beleaguered are angry because they've been screwed over and over and over by the system. Um, and now it's food prices going on and going up and mortgages going up and everything. If they can be peeled off from Trump, uh, then somebody like Haley might be able to do that. It would take, it took Nixon to go to China, and it would take Haley to be able to bring those people into the fold and the the Trump constituency. So Is that, I don't know if that answers your question, but
Well, we're starting out with the arc of your career, and you're saying it's mostly about management. And I had a thought, having watched one of your videos about the importance of a manager going to eat the scrambled eggs in economy class, and I got the impression, I think that my first experience of your work was in 1999 on the Leader to Leader article about the quiet. Was it leading or managing quietly? Is that?
I think it was managing quietly.
And I was so taken with the lack of ego and the lack of like the raw nature of so many things I was starting to see at the time, and Fast Company was becoming popular, and there was a lot of real energetic reactions in Fast Company. And I absolutely loved your article, and then started getting into the rise and fall of strategic planning and that kind of stuff. But I got the impression that you're the kind of person to go out and metaphorically, your scrambled eggs are going to look at a manager and to see exactly what they do. And is that
Yeah,
a fair?
this was a chief executive of Eastern Airlines, the biggest airline in the world at the time. And I was eating these hideous scrambled eggs in economy class, and he was bumping first class passengers so he could sit in first class. He never knew about those scrambled eggs. And to me, managing is about knowing about scrambled eggs. It means, sure, you sit in a business class or first class sometimes because those are your customers too, but you also need to sit in economy class and experience what they're experiencing. And he was too important to demean himself by sitting in economy class. And this is typical of so much that's going on. Another example of it, any chief executive who expects to be paid hundreds of times as much as the workers is not a leader, because the message being sent out is, I'm hundreds of times more important than you are. What kind of manager, what kind of chief executive is that? These aren't leaders.
Mm.
It's a joke. And yet we keep picking these kiss up and kick down kind of leaders, because the people who are choosing the chief executives like to be kissed up, and aren't aware that at facing the other way, they're kissing everybody down. They're kicking everybody down.
Mm.
And so we're completely unaware of that. And, that's why in a Mandela or a Broadbent, or I'm trying to think who in the UK who was revered for that kind of leadership. I mean, it's so few.
I mean,
Uh,
I
Roosevelt.
genuinely can't remember. And the idea of it now, the idea today of a political leader being revered is so far away from our current experience and the day-to-day interactions. And now the only thing we're thinking about is what have they done this time, and who's stolen what and given it to whom, and the levels of the corruption that's being exposed. It's just so demoralizing. And maybe this would be a good starting point of getting into your observations of in the so I don't know when you started looking at Rebalancing Society, but it came out in 2015. I just wonder if you can give us an overview of what you see as a cause of why we're so out of balance as a society.
Well, many societies are out of balance, each in their own way. We have three superpowers, and each is imbalanced in a different way. So the key point in Rebalancing Society, the book, is, I'm looking for a copy, it's not around. There we go. The key point is that a healthy society balances respected governments, responsible businesses, and robust communities. And it takes three legs, not two, like a stool. One leg, you can't sit a stool on one leg or two legs. You need three legs. And the plural, what I call the plural sector, or robust communities, or civil society, or NGOs, or not-for-profits, sort of all those things are the third leg. What we have in the superpowers today is we have Chinese communism left, which is imbalanced in favor of the public sector government, and America, which is imbalanced, and Britain, likewise, liberal democracies, so-called, which are imbalanced in favor of the private sector. and corporate interests and more predatory capitalism, and Russia, which is out of balance in favor of plural sector nationalism. Other plural sector countries, imbalanced populist, which is called populism, and other plural sector countries like that are Iran and Turkey with religious governments, and Venezuela and Nicaragua, which supposedly have governments that favor the poor, although that's hardly no more than China favors the proletariat in some ways. And so they're all out of balance, and they vie with each other for dominance, and they're going to kill us all. And it will take more likely a mistake than a lunatic. But it could be either, and so that drew me into that, and sort of a way to reframe it.
And your observation around the fall of the USSR as was, I found that to be a startling observation.
Yeah, I mean, they couldn't. Communism is flawed. The irony is that when communism fell, the American geniuses decided that capitalism had triumphed, and capitalism is just as flawed on the other side. So communism is flawed in favor of government, and capitalism is flawed in favor of business, and populism is flawed in favor of narrow community interests. And so, I look at Czechoslovakia because I happen to know it, lived there a bit for a while. And if you go back to Czechoslovakia, it was one of the richest and most democratic countries in the 30s. And then the Nazis moved in and forced a kind of populism on them. And then the Russians pushed out the Nazis and forced a kind of, forced not a kind of, their version of communism on them. And then when they finally kicked that out, you had people like Jeffrey Sachs coming in from America to tell them that it's all fine now. All you need is capitalism. And look what happened. So who do you vote for now in the Czech Republic? You've seen them all. Who do you vote for? And my answer is you vote for balance. You vote for balance across the sectors. But I make that point. You found it. Other people have found it. But I've probably sent 30 pieces into the New York Times. I would guess maybe 20 or 30 pieces in the New York Times. I finally got the ear of an editor, only for him to be fired because he was caught up in a scandal. So I can't get through. So I publish on my blog.
And I mean, you talk about the corporate press rather than independent press. Is that one of the problems that you experienced?
No, I don't think the New York Times turns me down because I'm not corporate. The Wall Street Journal might. Ironically, I'm probably more likely to get something in the Wall Street Journal than in the New York Times. I sent something in recently, and the editor was polite enough to reply personally within a day, saying they couldn't use it. But no, I don't think that's the problem. I think it's more a kind of mentality of what's sort of. I think I'm viewed as an outlier. They don't know what to make of me because I come up with these ideas, I'm working on a piece now. It's about to be published called "Superpower Corrupts." Antagonistic superpowers corrupt absolutely. Okay, so I've tried that with different places. You would think, it's an obvious point, isn't it? That if power corrupts, superpower must corrupt. So I've got it now in a management journal, which is not necessarily the best place for it. It would be a lot better in some more political thing, but I'm happy with it there because it's got circulation and just takes a few people to pick it up,
Yeah, definitely. And I think that it's one of those it's one of those areas where one of the quotes I took from Rebalancing Society is a society out of balance with power concentrated in the privileged elite can be ripe for revolution. And I certainly, I mean, as you were describing people who are angry and disaffected and have been done over so many times that they're ready for almost anything. And I know in one of the books you talk about the going from an administrator to a manager to a leader and then now we're looking for a hero
Or
to save us.
God, yeah.
And it's the size of the decay or the size of the problem that people perceive, the bigger the demand for the hero, and the bigger the hero is demanded.
Yeah.
And so unless we've got this larger than life figure, and currently we don't, when we had our Bojo experience with that of some larger than life figure, and that all went disastrously wrong. And then I guess in America we've got the rise of and the return of Trump. And people are, they're so desperate because they see so many problems everywhere. And it's rather than, as you describe in one of your books, is a healthy organization and a healthy society has little need for heroes because the leader doesn't make that much of a difference. Because I know you talk about the manager leaders and the same person doing both, and leadership being a form of managing or vice versa, but also the importance of communityship. And it's a deterioration of that. When I reading all of your work, when you're looking at the way in which MBAs manage or fail to manage and fail to bring and engage people, I just wonder if you'd talk a little bit about the damage that you've seen around the drop in engagement of people and the way in which in society businesses are caring less and less about individuals, about customers and employees. And if you'd just talk a little bit about that.
Jonathan, as you describe it, it seems patently obvious, doesn't it?
Yes.
I mean, and there are lots of people individually here and there. Ironically, in France and Japan, maybe more than in America, who look at this and say, "Yeah, isn't that obvious?" And yet, I can't get through. So I've got a very thick skin. So I just keep doing it and doing it and doing it. I don't give a damn. I'll keep doing it until I drop dead, until someone listens. I think where I addressed the lack of engagement is in a blog I did called "What is Dumbing Us Down?" Okay, and it could be something in the water. I mean, maybe it's fluoride in toothpaste. I don't know. I mean, something is dumbing us down. Something is making us unbelievably stupid. And about all kinds of things. I mean, smart people miss obvious things. Just every day there are examples of just obviously idiotic things happening. And so in that piece, I say, what could be dumbing us down? It could be toxins, in in what we breathe or eat or whatever, ingesting or inhaling or absorbing, these wonderful chemicals we put on our body. God knows what they do to us. It could be electronic toxins, which I suspect is a big factor that, I'm sitting here, you're sitting there, and we could be downloading millions and millions of emails and movies and huge files, and all that is swirling around us. And to think that this is having no effect on our mentality. And then there's Harari, who comes up with this wonderful thought that maybe for millennia, it's our indifference. I don't know if he uses the word. I can't remember if he used the word, but essentially he's writing about indifference when he says that the agricultural revolution might have been a big mistake. We might have been better off as hunters and gatherers, because we've been running rampage over everything in society, and destroying everything in our path in one way or another. And then that's millennia of indifference. And Pinker comes along and talks about centuries of progress and dismisses the nuclear, our nuclear weapons as one sign of progress that could wipe us out as we talk. Um, and um, uh, and and um, And then I'm talking about decades of imbalance, which I think could do us in after millennia of indifference. Um, so so engagement. The point I wanted to make about Harari is that he argues that the more we distance ourselves from our nature and from nature, the more we lose it. Um, and this could be a key problem. Why the disengagement? Too much pressure, uh, too much angst, not sleeping well, not eating well. Who knows? But who's looking at it? Who's asking the questions?
Mm, yeah. Do you know, while we're rebalancing society, there's on page 62, you have a fantastic diagram. It's a circle. And inside the circle, you've got three elements, which is state despotism, predatory capitalism, and exclusive populism. And that's the essence of the imbalance stool.
Yeah,
And then outside that, you have engaging democracy, responsible enterprise, and plural inclusion.
yeah,
Um, and you talk about in the spirit of balance, a plural inclusion based on open collaboration, responsible enterprise concerned with the legitimate needs of all stakeholders, an engaging democracy which seeks widespread involvement of the citizenry.
it's really good stuff. Nobody reads it. You're the only one.
Well, we're reading it, Henry. So, and I think it's the ideas you've got in this, and again, just looking at that. I mean, it's you describe it in one of your interviews as I know it started off as a pamphlet, didn't it? And of all your books, it's your books typically are between 300 and 500 pages, aren't they, with references and I just think that the pithiness of this as a description, it's very easy for someone to think, oh, what's behind this, when actually you've got 50 plus years of work and research into what makes an effective manager, what makes a good leader, and how do you see and create a future through strategy.
Yeah,
And that's really the areas that we're talking about. And I know, I mean, one of the things that our listeners are particularly interested in is the effect of externalities on things, the way in which someone can act, create a negative side effect to their actions, and pass that problem on to other people. And I
yeah,
think that's unfortunately, when you look at big business, that's increasingly what they're doing, isn't it? Really, is that they're creating profit solely for their shareholders, and punishing customers and punishing the communities where they operate because they're leaving a mess. And
yeah, yeah. And takes us back to economics. Um, Ethical economics. I think economics, by definition, is unethical. I don't mean that negatively. In the same way that psychology by itself is unethical, or anthropology by itself is unethical. In other words, we are not just economic people. We are not just social people. We are not just cultural people or political people. We are all of that. And when we overemphasize one, it's the same form of imbalance. When Hayek and Friedman, went on this rampage about it's all about business and free enterprise and all that, that's completely distorted. So in Rebalancing Society, I reduce economics to greed is good and markets are sufficient and governments are suspect. And that is a very dangerous, imbalanced view of the world. And yet it's a dominant social science view of the world, not just in economics, but across. We got sociologists kind of aping this kind of nonsense, and in methodologically, and everything is measurement, and the qualitative is as important as the quantitative, and yet the economists, suffer from physics envy, as they say, and I want to be just as respected as the physicists. These greed is good and all that. As one view of human nature, it makes some sense. As the view of human nature, it's utter nonsense. Because we're not just, what I like to say to economists, probably in the book, who take this position is, what kind of mother did you have? No such thing as benevolence. Every benevolence is calculated. Mothers are benevolent because they want to be famous because their sons are famous. I mean, you know,
Yeah, I think that, and it's one of the
perverse.
things in with our authors, they often talk about Adam Smith, and the way in which that everyone talks about the invisible hand, but no one talks about moral sentiment. And
Yeah,
no,
yeah,
you
exactly,
know,
exactly.
and
Even
that
the invisible hand he questioned. Yeah.
and the whole idea that when I know in one of your books you talk about the invisible hand for the butcher, and you're relying on the self-interest of the butcher and the candlestick maker and whomever to pursue their own self-interest, but it was always within the context of a community in
Yeah.
which they lived and belonged, and they could not even entertain the thought of not being part of that community. So there
Yeah.
was always that measure, wasn't there, of any kind. If I wanted to give you slightly less beef this week, then I know that I'd have problems the week after, because down the pub you'd be challenging me about it and telling our friends about what I'd done, and so I would have immediate feedback and consequence. And so that's everything dealt with, because the best we've got today are TripAdvisor reviews and Google reviews, and when you've got companies operating like sovereign states, not just sovereign individuals, then that's where we get our problems, isn't it? Because they can act with impunity, as you describe it, of no taxation with full representation.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's the visible claw. It's not the invisible hand. It's the visible claw right now. Look. Friedman. Why did Friedman support Pinochet? And Pinochet was throwing kids out of airplanes into the ocean, for God's sakes. And why would Friedman support him? Because he was in favor of free enterprise. I mean, this is an example. It's madness where a man is supposed to be smart and supposedly won a Nobel Prize, even though there is no Nobel Prize in economics. And why does everybody call it a damn Nobel Prize when on nobelprize.org there's a sentence buried away which says something saying this is not a Nobel Prize? They don't even have the guts to put it up front. And so that's the power of economics. It's sick. It's
Yeah.
sick. And the New York Times kept going back and forth between Nobel Prize, Nobel Memorial Prize. In one week they had both. Why don't they just call it the Bank of Sweden Prize? That's what it is. It's a prize economists created for themselves.
I
Uh,
didn't until I came back to reread your works. I didn't remember that bit. I didn't remember there isn't a Nobel Prize in economics. But I know. I mean, when I look at all your work, there's a wonderful simplicity to it. And there was one quote I got from you quote Watson, and I think it was in Managing. A healthy organization is not a collection of detached human resources who simply look after their own turf. It's a community of responsible human beings who care about the entire system and its long-term survival.
yeah, sounds good.
Thank you for listening. If you want to find out more information, check out the Ethical Economics website, where you'll find more information about our authors and the work of our sponsor, Shepherd Walwyn.